Ulysses is a groundbreaking modernist novel that chronicles a single day, June 16th, 1904, in the life of Leopold Bloom, an ordinary Dubliner. Inspired by Homer's Odyssey, the book mirrors the epic's structure through the mundane yet complex experiences of its characters. With stream of consciousness narration, shifting styles, and linguistic experimentation, Joyce delves into themes of identity, time, memory, and the inner workings of the human mind. The book is written by James Joyce, 1882 to 1941, who was an Irish novelist and literary innovator known for reshaping the modern novel. Born in Dublin, Joyce spent much of his life in exile across Europe, yet his work remained deeply rooted in Irish life and culture. Renowned for his intricate style, allusions, and narrative daring, Joyce's legacy includes major works like Dubliners, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Ulysses, and Finnegan's Wake. On a soft summer morning in Dublin, the city stirred gently as sunlight kissed the sea. A young man named Stephen Dedalus stood in a tower by the water's edge. He lived there with two other men, though their closeness was thin and fragile. Stephen, thoughtful and solemn, had the weight of grief in his eyes. His mother had died, and her memory clung to him like mist. He wrestled with guilt, for he had refused to pray at her deathbed, and now her ghost haunted his waking thoughts. Stephen was a teacher, a restless soul who taught children with little joy, wandering through life more in thought than in presence. His mind drifted between memories, philosophies, and inner doubts. The Dublin around him felt both too familiar and too foreign, a place filled with voices of the past and echoes of his ambitions. He longed to break free, to become someone greater, but found himself tangled in the threads of his own making. He lived inside himself, more comfortable in his reflections than in the world that waited outside. His roommates were louder, brasher. Buck Mulligan, one of them, seemed to Stephen both clever and careless, too quick with jokes, too comfortable with blasphemy. Buck teased him, called him names, tried to draw him into cheerier spirits, but Stephen felt only a growing distance. There was something hollow in the camaraderie, something false that Stephen couldn't play alone with. After a tense morning, Stephen left the tower behind, unsure when or whether he'd return. Elsewhere in the same city, as the clock ticked forward, a man named Leopold Bloom began his day. He was older than Stephen, quieter, his life shaped by small rituals and private thoughts. He made breakfast for his wife, Molly, who remained in bed, drowsy and dreaming. Bloom stepped into the sunlight, his steps purposeful but unhurried. He had errands to run, things to do, and memories that followed him like shadows. Bloom was kind, curious, and oddly tender. He stopped to buy a bar of lemon soap, visited a butcher, and took care of the day's little needs. But underneath it all, his heart carried a sorrow he rarely spoke of. He had lost a son in infancy, and that loss made the world a softer, sadder place. And though he loved his wife deeply, he knew, perhaps only half admitting it, that she had begun an affair with another man. Still, he moved forward, trying to stay whole in a world of quiet fractures. His wife, Molly, was warm and earthy, confident in her body, generous with her voice. He was a singer, once full of ambition, now mostly content with the comforts of home. Her thoughts lingered on an upcoming visit from a concert manager, Blazes Boylan, a man with whom she shared more than music. But for now she remained under the covers, alone, while Bloom moved through the streets. As the morning unfolded, both Stephen and Bloom made their way through Dublin, each of them walking paths filled with memories, regrets, and questions. Stephen found himself caught in thoughts of art and identity, while Bloom wandered through markets and cemeteries, pondering birth and death. At a funeral he stood among others, but felt alone. As the priest spoke solemn words, Bloom's mind drifted wondering about the body, about the soul, about what happens when the breath leaves and silence remains. In the background, the city lived its life. Trams clattered on cobblestones. Children played. Men debated politics in pubs. The scent of bread drifted from bakery windows. And in all this motion, the inner worlds of Bloom and Stephen circled quietly, like dancers who hadn't yet met. Bloom's day was filled with mundane encounters, but he noticed everything. A woman at the market, a cloud passing over the sun, the way someone laughed at a joke he didn't hear. His thoughts were like birds flitting from one place to the next, sometimes tender, sometimes sensual, sometimes silly. He remembered the touch of his wife's hand. He imagined what she was doing while he was gone. He wondered about the body, the spirit, the mysteries that surrounded everyday life. Stephen, on the other hand, grew increasingly distant. He spoke with others, but rarely felt understood. He wandered to the shore, stared at the sea, and felt a pull toward escape, perhaps, or simply toward meaning. He longed to write, to express something deep and unspeakable. But the words felt stuck, and the world seemed not yet ready to hear him. He felt trapped between two forces, the traditions that shaped him and the future he hadn't yet claimed. The memory of his mother hovered in every thought, her face appearing in the patterns of his dreams. And though he tried to rise above it, guilt tugged at him like an anchor. Bloom, meanwhile, stopped by the post office to check for a letter. He had been corresponding with a woman under a false name, seeking comfort in the anonymity of their exchange. There was no letter today, but he lingered anyway, watching the world pass by, absorbing the strange poetry of ordinary life. Through these quiet hours, both men moved like ships in the same harbor, aware of the water, unaware of each other. But their paths, slow and unhurried, were quietly curving toward one another. The city was vast, but not so vast that two lonely minds couldn't meet. And as noon approached, the sun, climbing higher over Dublin's rooftops, both men, one young and searching, the other older and wondering, continued walking forward through the living, breathing theater of a single ordinary day. As the afternoon light warmed the city's stone and glass, the streets of Dublin grew fuller, livelier, more tangled with voices and footsteps. Leopold Bloom wandered into a pub, sat quietly, and listened to the banter of others. He wasn't much of a drinker or a talker in crowds, more of an observer. Men spoke of politics, of Arnold, of Ireland's fate, of religion and loyalty. Bloom, a Jewish man in a mostly Catholic city, felt the tension of being different. He smiled politely, offered a word here and there, but inside, his thoughts wandered elsewhere, toward Molly, toward memories, toward his own sense of belonging. He thought about his father, who had taken his own life many years ago. That loss still echoed inside him, like a deep hallway that narrowed and darkened with time. He often carried the grief quietly, turning it over like a stone in his pocket. He didn't speak of it much, but it lived with him. It shaped how he moved through the world, how he listened more than he spoke, how he treated even strangers with a kind of fragile understanding. There was a softness to Bloom, a gentleness that made him seem out of step with the faster, rougher voices around him. Elsewhere in the city, Stephen Dedalus made his way into a library. Books surrounded him like a forest of silent thoughts. He stood among scholars and critics, all dressed in quiet pride, debating literature and the ghosts of the past. They spoke of Shakespeare, and Stephen, despite his weariness, felt sparks flicker in his mind. He had ideas, bold, poetic, strange ideas. He spoke them aloud, weaving thoughts about Hamlet, about fathers and sons, about memory and identity. He was passionate, but even as he spoke, he felt the weight of being misunderstood. The others heard him, but they didn't quite listen. Leaving the library, he stepped into the bright air, blinking against the sun, as if waking from a long, dim dream. The world outside was noisier now, the city alive with the sounds of traffic and trade, of carts rolling over cobblestones and conversations drifting from open windows. Yet Stephen still felt alone in the noise, separate from the people around him. He wandered aimlessly. More thought than body, more spirit than man. Bloom, always drawn to movement and quiet observation, continued his wandering. He went to the post office to check for a letter, not for business, but for something more secret. He had been writing, under a false name, to a woman he had never met. Their letters were delicate and romantic, a kind of escape, but there was no letter for him today. Still he lingered, letting the motion of people soothe his thoughts. He visited a museum, walked past paintings and statues, and stood silently before them. He wasn't analyzing the art. He was feeling it, absorbing it in his own way. To Bloom, even the smallest detail, a curled lip in a sculpture, the shadow under a painted eye held meaning. Everything had a story. Everything spoke if you listened carefully enough. Meanwhile, Stephen found himself caught in a swirl of drink and words. Friends surrounded him, or at least people he had once called friends. They drank, they debated, they laughed loudly, but the warmth of companionship felt shallow. Stephen tried to join in, tried to lose himself in the rhythm of voices and glasses clinking, but something inside him resisted. He felt the heaviness of his own mind, the pull of thoughts too deep for casual chatter, and so his detachment grew. Bloom, too, stepped into another room of voices. This time it was a newspaper office, full of busy people, smells of ink and coffee, and chatter about deadlines and gossip. Bloom had come to place an advertisement, but stayed longer than he needed. He drifted through the space like a silent witness, taking in the sights, the tone of each person's voice, the way one man tapped his pencil without noticing. Even here, in a place of noise and purpose, Bloom found moments of stillness. As he left, the streets had begun to shift into late afternoon. The sun hung lower. The edges of the day began to soften. Bloom visited a maternity hospital next, where time itself seemed to bend. Life was being born inside those walls. He watched and waited, comforted and unnerved. The sight of new life stirred memories of his own lost child, Rudy. His name came to Bloom like a breeze, always gentle, always gone too soon. He thought of what might have been, what kind of boy Rudy would be now, how he might walk, what he might say. He left the hospital with a heart both heavy and tender. Outside, the world continued without noticing. Horses trotted by. Vendors called out. The sky deepened a shade. He kept walking, and not far away, Stephen, drunker now, more frayed, felt his thoughts unraveling. He argued, not just with words, but with his very presence. He no longer tried to connect only to escape. The world felt too close and too far all at once. He left the tavern, uncertain of where he was going. He wandered like a ghost through streets that once felt familiar, stumbling through the city he had grown up in but never quite belonged to. The city, vast and old, wrapped itself around both men like a great silent witness. And as twilight began to settle over Dublin, Leopold Bloom, walking a slower path now, heard of Stephen. A boy, they said, a troubled soul, a name mentioned faintly in conversation. Something in Bloom stirred not pity, not charity, but something more fatherly, something warm and quiet. He didn't know Stephen yet, but he sensed him the way one lonely soul might sense another through the fog. And so the city moved them, one older, one younger, slowly, gently, toward each other. Evening had crept over Dublin like a shawl drawn across tired shoulders. The day, once so full of light and routine, had softened into shadows and quiet corners. Lamps flickered on in shop windows, casting little pools of gold on the pavement. Bloom, never in a hurry, now moved with a different kind of stillness, less from fatigue, more from the weight of memory. There was something sacred about this time of day for him. He didn't need to speak it aloud. It simply lived within him. He drifted toward the red glow of pubs and the blue hush of night-time alleys, stopping now and then to listen to laughter, to glance at headlines, or to simply stand and feel the city breathe. His thoughts became more tender, more melancholic. He thought of Molly again, her voice, her warmth, and the knowledge of what was happening that very evening. Blazes Boylan would be visiting her. Bloom knew it. He had always known. Yet he didn't run home, didn't rage. He carried the truth like a warm coin tucked beneath the skin, a truth that ached but didn't break him. There was no confrontation in him, no explosion. Just quiet acceptance, and perhaps a touch of sorrow too deep to name. Some might have called him weak, but there was a strength in Bloom that didn't need to shout. He simply endured. With every step, he absorbed the pain and softened it with kindness, like water rounding the edges of a stone. He walked toward the edge of the city's merrier side, where the noise of drink and song spilled out from behind swinging doors. And in the rhythm of this city night, he thought again of Rudy. If only the boy had lived. Would he have been like Stephen? Would he have played music or read books or asked hard questions about the world? Bloom didn't know. He only knew that some part of him still waited for a version of Rudy that would never arrive. At that same hour, Stephen stumbled out of a brothel. His thoughts were clouded, his balance unsure. He had been drinking heavily, his tongue sharper than his judgment. He had tried to forget his fears in the distractions of music and women and liquor, but the effort had only left him more lost. He argued, loudly, foolishly. He insulted someone, perhaps a soldier, perhaps more than one. The details blurred, voices rose. A scuffle began. He was struck. A fist, sudden and hard. The world swam. Someone shouted. He fell perhaps not entirely to the ground, but deep enough into helplessness. The city, already blurry, spun completely out of his grasp. Somewhere inside him the old guilt flared again. His mother, his failures, the endless sense of not quite belonging. He wanted to rise, but couldn't. He wanted to speak, but said nothing. The world, once so full of ideas and light, had closed around him. And then, in that moment of spiraling silence, Bloom appeared. He had been walking by, not expecting to find anything, but found Stephen crumpled and dazed. Something in Bloom responded instantly, not out of duty, not out of curiosity, but out of quiet instinct. He stepped in. He helped. He spoke gently, reasoned with the others, calmed the noise. He shielded Stephen, lifted him, steadied him. There were no grand gestures, no announcements. Just care, simple and honest. It was a quiet act, but one full of meaning. He didn't know Stephen well. He barely knew him at all. But it didn't matter. Bloom saw in him something he had lost, or perhaps something he still longed for. A chance to protect, to guide, to offer something small and real in a world full of ghosts. He brought Stephen to safety, somewhere quieter, somewhere warm. A cab carried them through the hushed streets, and Bloom, ever the gentle soul, spoke softly, letting Stephen rest. His thoughts wandered again, but now they had company. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like something sacred, as if they had stumbled into a kind of understanding beyond words. They reached Bloom's home, small, ordinary, touched by domestic stillness. The kind of house where shoes waited by the door and familiar smells hung in the air. Bloom made tea, offered comfort, not as a host or a rescuer, but simply as a man doing what felt right. He opened the door to his private world, not out of pride, but with the quiet grace of someone who had nothing to prove. Stephen, still dazed, still guarded, accepted the kindness in a half-dreaming state. He didn't speak much, but there was a strange peace in the moment. Bloom asked if he wanted to stay the night. Stephen declined. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear, maybe just the pull of the streets that had shaped him. Or maybe he simply didn't know how to receive what Bloom was offering, a sense of home, if only for a night. And so, after a brief pause in Bloom's quiet kitchen, he stepped back into the night. The city accepted him again, the way it always did, indifferent and vast, but something had shifted. Two lives that had moved through the city like distant stars had touched, briefly, meaningfully, and though they parted soon after, the moment lingered. Bloom remained alone in his home. He moved quietly through the rooms, careful not to wake Molly. He undressed, folded his clothes, and slipped into bed beside her. She stirred, but did not speak. The warmth of her body was there, as familiar as ever, but Bloom's mind was elsewhere, full of echoes, full of the day that had passed like no other. He closed his eyes and listened to the stillness, to the soft breath beside him, to the memory of a boy who never grew up, to the fragile hope that kindness, once given, might find a way back. The city outside continued its breathing. The night deepened. Footsteps faded, lamps flickered out one by one, and in the dark both men apart now found themselves reflecting, not with answers, but with the slow, heavy calm that follows a long and winding day. As night deepened over Dublin, the city seemed to hold its breath. The streets grew quieter, but inside the small homes and rooms, thoughts and feelings stirred just as fiercely. Leopold Bloom continued his wandering, carrying the weight of the day lightly but thoughtfully. He moved through familiar places with a gentle reverence, the corner shop where the butcher laughed, the silent church where prayers drifted like whispers, the narrow alleyways where shadows gathered and secrets hid. His mind returned again to Molly. Though she rested in their shared bed, her thoughts were far away, flowing in a stream of memories and desires, old loves and present worries. Bloom thought of the upcoming visit from Blazes Boylan, the man who would soon enter their home and test the bonds of marriage with his confident presence. Yet Bloom did not rage or brood. Instead, he felt a quiet sadness mixed with understanding, a knowledge that love was complex and layered, often difficult and always changing. Meanwhile, Stephen Dedalus, still shaken from the night's earlier violence, wandered through the city's darker corners. His thoughts swirled with poetry and pain, with the ghosts of his mother and the burden of his own conscience. He moved like a shadow, himself half present, half lost in memories and fears. The city around him was a stage of light and dark, of voices and silences, and Stephen played his part, though uncertain whether it was one of hope or despair. As Bloom passed by the cabman's shelter, a small refuge for weary travelers and lost souls, he noticed Stephen there, sitting quietly, head bowed. There was something fragile in the younger man's posture, something familiar to Bloom's own experience of loneliness and longing. Without hesitation, Bloom approached and sat beside him. Their eyes met briefly, two strangers recognizing an unspoken kinship. In the shelter they shared warmth and simple words. Bloom offered Stephen cocoa, a small comfort in the cold night. They spoke of many things, not with the clamor of a crowd, but in the hush of two people trying to find their way. Stephen's words were filled with dreams and questions, with the tangled threads of youth and intellect. Bloom listened with patience, responding with the quiet wisdom of experience and empathy. Though their lives were different, they shared a common search, a yearning for meaning, connection, and a place in a world that often seemed indifferent. For a moment the city's noise fell away, leaving only the soft sound of two hearts beating in tentative friendship. After their brief communion, Bloom offered to bring Stephen home for rest and safety. Stephen hesitated, proud and wary, but the kindness was genuine, and he accepted. In Bloom's modest house on Eccles Street, the two men found shelter from the night's uncertainties. The room smelled of old wood and familiar life, and the silence was warm, filled with unspoken understanding. As Stephen rested, Bloom moved quietly through his home, careful not to wake Molly. He thought of her, of their complicated love, and the tangled feelings that lived between them. Though they were physically close, their hearts and minds often drifted apart, caught in the currents of time and desire. In the quiet hours before dawn, Molly's thoughts unfolded in a private soliloquy, a stream of consciousness that spilled over with memories, fantasies, and raw emotion. She remembered the freedom of youth in Gibraltar, the thrill of performance and applause, the passion of early loves, and the weight of betrayal. Her mind traced the paths of her life like a map, showing both the bright lights and the shadows. Molly's voice was unfiltered, bold, and honest, a striking contrast to the reserved worlds of Bloom and Stephen. She embraced her desires without shame and acknowledged the complexities of her marriage with a mixture of humor and sorrow. In her inner world she was both woman and goddess, lover and queen, caught between past and present. As dawn broke over Dublin, the city slowly awakened from its night's slumber. The streets began to fill with footsteps and chatter. Windows glowed with morning light, and the air was fresh with possibility. Bloom, Stephen, and Molly each faced the new day differently, one with quiet hope, one with restless uncertainty, one with dreams still lingering in the night's afterglow. The story of their shared day was not one of grand gestures or heroic feats, but of small moments of kindness, longing, doubt, and connection. It was a tapestry woven from the ordinary and the extraordinary, a reflection of life itself. And as the sun rose higher, casting golden light on the city, the day's journey rested gently, like a lullaby whispered to a world that never truly sleeps. As the night deepened and the city's breath slowed to a whisper, Leopold Bloom found himself walking the familiar streets with a new sense of purpose, though his heart was heavy with quiet sorrow. The encounter earlier with Stephen Dedalus, the young man, fragile and lost, lingered in his mind like a faint light in the darkness. Bloom sensed in Stephen a reflection of his own loneliness and longing, a soul struggling to find a place in the vast, indifferent world. Their brief meeting had been unexpected but profound. Bloom's instinct to care had drawn him to protect Stephen from harm, to offer shelter and warmth in a city that often felt cold and unforgiving. Though Stephen had declined to stay the night, the bond between them had been sealed in silence and gentle kindness, a momentary crossing of two very different lives. Now, as Bloom walked the dim streets toward his home on Eccles Street, he reflected on the complex tapestry of his own life. His wife, Molly Strong, sensual yet distant, rested there, a presence both comforting and elusive. The knowledge of her affair with Blazes Boylan weighed on him, yet he bore it with a quiet resilience, a steady heart that refused to shatter. Inside their home, Molly lay awake in the deepening night, her thoughts a flowing river of memories and desires. She drifted between past and present, recalling the sun-drenched days of her youth in Gibraltar, the exhilaration of the stage and the music that once filled her soul. Her mind traced the tangled paths of love and betrayal, the sweetness and bitterness that life had handed her in equal measure. Her thoughts moved like a song, sometimes joyous, sometimes mournful, capturing the essence of a woman who refused to be defined by the roles others imposed. In the solitude of her room, Molly embraced her own truths, unvarnished and unapologetic. She remembered her first kiss, the thrill of passion, the comfort and constraint of marriage, and the daring freedom of secret desires. As dawn's first light crept softly through the window, Molly's reverie folded gently into sleep. Outside, Dublin stirred awake, the city ready to carry its inhabitants through another day of ordinary miracles and quiet struggles. Leopold, too, settled beneath the covers, his thoughts mingling with the fragile hope that tomorrow might bring healing, or at least understanding. Stephen, somewhere beyond the city's reach, walked alone, his restless spirit searching for meaning in the endless flow of life. The day that began on the beach with a young dreamer and wound through the heart of Dublin, touching the lives of three complex souls, came to its close not with resolution, but with a quiet acceptance of life's mystery. There was no grand conclusion, no tidy ending, only the steady pulse of human existence, its joys, sorrows, and the enduring light of connection found in unexpected places. And so, beneath the rising sun, the story of that single day in Dublin rested softly, a whispered lullaby to the world that keeps turning, forever alive with hope and longing. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Ulysses, a day in the life of Dublin and the intertwined souls within it. This story reminds us that even in the ordinary there is beauty, complexity, and connection waiting to be found. If you enjoyed this narration, please like, subscribe, and share for more stories told softly and thoughtfully. Until next time, may your days be filled with quiet wonder and gentle reflection. Good night.